Good morning, LinkedIn. This is Rachel B. Lee. It is Friday. I hope you're feeling good on this Friday, wherever you are in the world. It is 10 a.m. Central here in Austin, Texas. And Jeff is in from Seattle, Washington. And I am so pumped for Geoffrey Cologne to be my guest today. We met when I worked at Microsoft. He is currently the head of brand studio at Microsoft Advertising. He's been there for about the last 8 or 9 years. He was VP of strategy at Ogilvy. He's the author of Disruptive Marketing. He has a co-executive producer of The Download. He also has like a streetwear brand. I mean, the list is like ridiculous, Jeff. Because you're that effing cool, if you ask me.
When do I sleep?
When do you sleep? That's why you have the coffee, huh? But, Jeff, I would love for you our topic today is disruptive marketing. And I love your thinking behind marketing today, what everyone's doing wrong, where we're going in the future. You're just super honest and really smart about that. And so I'd love for you to just introduce yourself a little bit, what you've been working on. And I really love for you to define disruptive marketing. I know the book is a few years old, but it's not old, right?
Yeah. Well, first of all, always good to see you. Always great to talk to you. I think, when we ran into each other at events, I always enjoyed like just talking to you for like an hour plus on just what the world is up to. And it was a lot of fun. Also, when you did work at Microsoft, we used to bump into each other, that was also a lot of fun. So really happy to see what you're up to these days. Where do you start? I mean, disruptive marketing, not a new term by any means, Rachel, something that's been utilized for a couple of decades. I think, there's a whole book that this author, J. Conrad Levinson, wrote called Guerrilla Marketing. That's really, I think, where the basis of most of that starts. And if you look at the first agency to use a lot of those tactics back in the day, it was Kirschenbaum, Bond, and Partners, which became KBS&P. John Bond was one of the co-founders of that. They used a lot of these techniques with big brands that I think a lot of street artists were like using to just get their messages out there. If we think about the world of marketing, marketers have sort of co-opted all of it. They've sort of said, we've done all these things and they're all original and they're all our ideas. The better marketers have said, hey, we've stolen all these ideas from different parts of of culture. And we've used them in ways to sort of, push what we're looking to try to do. I think in the past couple of years, what I wrote about in the book is that you'd have the physical world and the digital world, and they would fuse and play off one another. And now we've seen that as a result of the pandemic. Of course, when I wrote the book, I had no idea that there was going to be a pandemic. I just was sort of looking at technology and behavior. But now we have this. I mean, some of the most exciting marketing that's out there is using physical space again, knowing that social media will continue to amplify it. And people are like, they want to see things in the physical world. I mean, if you're holed up for an entire year and now you're sort of out and about again and you're like, oh, that's really interesting what people are doing. And we're starting to see this more and more with how people are using digital displays in physical spaces. We're also starting to see it, and I think a good example of disruptive marketing is what the AMC sort of game stonks movement did this past summer. They bought a digital out-of-home billboard in Times Square for $18, and they basically ran an ad saying, burr, burr, the stonk goes up. And then they amplified that all over social media to the point where the digital out-of-home companies like, hey, you can no longer buy hourly rates on these digital out-of-home billboards, and we don't want anyone who's doing crypto or any of these other stonks to sort of buy this. I personally think that was one of the best moves ever, because what you end up getting is you get a lot of people in marketing fields that just think about what can we do? How do we sort of break some rules? And I also think it's interesting because disruptive marketing has always been tied to sort of this, That's what a bunch of guys do who don't really have any other time to do. I think some of the best disruptive marketing is actually happening by female-led organizations that realize this is how you get attention. Bumble has done a really good job
Yeah,
in
they
using
have.
disruptive
Here in
marketing.
Austin.
Yeah, I mean, like, so it's not a thing that's just. I think a decade ago it was something that people thought, hey, that's something that only certain companies use. I
Yeah.
think any company can use it depending on what product or solution they're trying to call attention to. Some people have asked me, would Microsoft ever use this? Yeah, if you had a new solution, you would want to sort of call attention to it, depending on the audience. I mean, not people like to pay attention to things. This is why we slow down and rubberneck on the highway. This is why we are fascinated with, hey, what is happening between these two people who may be having like a fake argument on social media. I mean, you name it, Rachel, there's
Yeah.
possibilities are endless in this area.
Absolutely, Jeff. I want to say I can't see the names. It says LinkedIn user, but we do have some people here, including my dad watching, just so you know. My
Good
dad,
to
Bill
hear.
Bronstein. I see Julie Mathers. I love to say hi. And yay, female founders. Yes, 100% agree. Um, when you think about, we had this conversation, right, around big corporations and sort of like you just mentioned, Bumble, right? These smaller companies that have used content and social media to really change the market. And then you have corporations that seemingly see they're ahead of the curve, but as we know, way behind. And me personally,
Yeah.
leaving the corporate side, going into entrepreneurship, being around these online marketers, social media people, and influencers, I'm like, whoa, this is a pace, right? And thinking that is so different. Um, we kind of a mixed audience here, but what do you think people are doing wrong right now when it goes to their marketing strategy and thinking about content and social media? Because you're doing some pretty unique things. Would love for you to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing that companies are really afraid of is they say they want a culture of risk and experimentation, but that's just a way to try to attract interesting people. And then once those people, I think, get to those companies, they realize, wait a minute, there is no risk and experimentation really allowed unless I follow the guidelines of what their rules and all their methods are. And I understand that from a branding perspective. Brands want to lead with brands, but we've sort of entered this phase the past couple of years, and of course I watch a lot of your programming on it, where most brands are led by real people. And this isn't like a new phenomenon. This goes back, hundreds of years, where, you had a founder of a company, people were interested in what the founder had to say. Social media has now opened that up. It's diversified it more. People are more interested in knowing what founders of various companies, have to say. That, especially founders that are trying to revolutionize certain lines of business. Hey, we're going to
Yeah.
just sort of change how this has operated. So I think that's one area where it's much more personality led, when we look at companies. But brands don't want to lead with personalities. They want to lead with, hey, we want to lead with what the brand has to say. What ultimately happens there, Rachel, is most people just turn the off button, the off switch on. When I did research for the book, years ago, I saw a lot of this happening. People aren't really interested in knowing what a brand has to say. To be honest with you, and this may hurt a lot of people don't want a relationship with a brand. They're not interested in having a relationship with a brand. They want to use a brand for a solution or because it's top of mind. I think some of that is finally coming back again. You've had this sort of movement the last 10 years where it's like, hey, I buy that brand because there's purpose behind that brand and I want a relationship with that brand. No, they don't. People aren't interested in that. They're actually interested in having a relationship with other people. You may work for a company, and that's where I think a lot of things are sort of where we're missing a lot of the ability. The employee advocacy programs don't really exist at big brands. You can't really, I think, say who you are and sort of bring your full self at many of these companies. And I call this out because most companies say they have sort of a mission around, hey, we want the best people, we want the brightest people, we want the most diverse workforce. However, when you get here, you have to conform to our rules. I don't know if that's going to work moving forward. And I think that's why there's so many exciting startups that are out there in the world. And a lot of people have taken, dipped their toe into the entrepreneurial world, like yourself, because you're like, hey, I can actually be my authentic self around others and what I'm trying to do. And I think that's where there's a whole sort of misdirect. But the stuff we're doing is very personality led in terms of the content that we're doing. Um, we have employees that are making all the content. I like to call it sort of like an in-house creator studio. We're all sort of creators making things. That is very, I think that's interesting when most companies haven't moved it really at all in that direction or don't even have guidelines for that. I mean, right now, most companies will say like, hey, here's what you can and can't do on social media. I think what happened the past couple of years, Rachel, that's interesting is I know a lot of people who just, started TikToks, started to do more creator content on Instagram, started to use LinkedIn more. I mean, you think about sort of the mediums that are out there, and that's just opened up, hey, wait a minute, I work for this company, but I also create content. I guess I am sort of an employee advocate based on the culture that I sort of push and the methodology that I push. And I think it's going to catch a lot of companies off guard because anything can be made now on your pocket phone, edited, made to look good, and distributed worldwide. I mean, we've seen some TikToks where people are just talking in their car that have like, billions of views. And that's really where I think the next disruption is basically happening. And companies are not ready for really, I think,
What's the
arming their creators.
disruption? The disruption is that the people are the creators and really the makers of the business and driving customers. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. It's no longer the brand, it's the people that work at the brand. And that's going to lead to hierarchical battles between, hey, you're sort of lower in the company, you shouldn't be doing that. The CEO should be doing that. You know what? I'm going to just go start my own business. We're already seeing this happen at a lot of companies. They're having a hard time with retention. This is not, why are people leaving companies right now, Rachel? Everyone puts it on the pandemic. People I think they just saw the writing on the wall. They were able to hit that pause button during the pandemic, and they're like, this is not really what I want to be doing. And I think that should scare a lot of big companies because human capital is really what they're buying nowadays when you basically hire people. And I think they're running into sort of like a problem of getting the most interesting people to sort of come to their come inside their sort of walls and build their culture. I think most people moving forward, graduating college, are going to want to be more entrepreneurial by design. And those people ultimately represent competition for big companies. But you know what? That's the nature of the economic system. So I sort of welcome that.
I mean, what you're talking about is literally to my soul because the reason why I left corporate and what Josh and I do is because we believe it's in the people. It's in the personal brands. That this is where it is. There's no better time right now for people to understand what a personal brand is and who they are and to maximize it and bring their vision to the life because this is it. The company brands are important, but it's the people that run them. So what you're saying is just not only, I think it's fact, it is where it's going because of this movement with the pandemic, people burning out.
Yep.
And social media, let's be honest. Like I had this mate, like Heartland Ray. I guess she had they these two. Do you know them on TikTok?
I do. Yep.
Almost 7 million followers. They were on my Work Your Brand room on Tuesday. Here I am talking like here I am. We're just chatting. This, talking about how are you creating your content? What is your methodology? 100 plus people in the room. I mean, Jeff, it's a different world. It's just people that are listening right now or later, they might own their own business. They might work for a company. I mean, they're going to be disrupted. You're getting disrupted. So like, what are you doing to ride the wave, as they say?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is, how do you use your likeness to continue to sort of, move your business forward? Also, Rachel, one of the things that was interesting this past year was the decision on the NCAA can't control an athlete's likeness in terms of, like, that has ramifications on how business works as well. Like, if you're using your likeness to sort of push business forward, what are the laws on that? What are the regulations on that? Not a lot of that exists. That's where the disruption is. So I think,
Oh, yeah.
the law field is always behind by a decade. I'm not cutting on that. It's just that they always take a long time to catch up to where the world is. And I think that's what's happened. And I think that's why a lot of people have said, I'm just going to go sort of create my own business. And you have creators that have created businesses out of the fact they've been popular creators. I mean, we could name probably 100 creators on YouTube that have started other businesses because they've used their sort of personal brand, as you've noted, to get into other lines of business. So I think those are areas that people should be looking at. Is not everyone's going to be a huge YouTuber, but you could have a business that you could basically be known in your community for, and that again is sort of a remix of how things worked decades ago, pre-social media. Now with social media, it just can scale, I think, a lot faster and a lot bigger. So you can actually be known. Let's say you start a business in Austin, you could in a year you could be maybe known around the country and then around the world, just because you're using that scale to your advantage. You're doing interesting things and you're calling attention to yourself, and people are like, hey, I'm interested in what that business has to offer, and the people behind it. That's the most important thing. And the people behind it is the equation.
Yeah, totally agree. I think a lot of people watching might not fully understand what it means to be head of brand studio and what you're doing at Microsoft Advertising. I mean, a lot of people don't do some, Bing is not like the go-to for a lot of people. I would love for you to tell people, what does it mean to be head of brand studio? What does it mean to be leading creative content and thought leadership and being an executive producer? Can you talk about that? A little insight in the walls?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like if we look at where most companies are moving, and this is a new phenomenon that's sort of a remix of an old way of how things worked at companies. Brand studio or a creative studio is an in-house studio that basically makes content or creative to amplify a brand. So in the past, in-house studios were very popular at department stores. If we look back into the 1950s and 1960s, department stores used external agencies, but they had their in-house agencies, Rachel, because they understood exactly what was needed for that department store. This is the print ad we're going to do. This is what the circular is going to look like. This is what the in-store displays are going to look like. And in-house has existed for a very long period of time, but it sort of lost popularity as we moved into the 80s and 90s, and companies cut back and said, let's outsource most of this to external agencies. What's happened in the past couple of years is the identification that media buying has become a lot easier to do. It's what we call self-serve. You can basically be running a company or at a company and say, hey, what advertising do we want to take out that's basically digital, whether that's paid social or paid search. Now it's even gotten easier to do things like out of home. You can basically use programmatic. You can go on to basically a number of different solutions and say, I'm going to buy a bunch of billboards in these 10 markets. You don't even need to go through like a media buying agency to do this anymore. What that's done is it's said, hey, wait a minute, let's bring all the data and all the people that we have in-house to sort of run all these campaigns. And as we know, content and creative is a big part of any campaign that you do. It's not just like the targeting of who you reach as an audience, but it's what they're seeing and what they're engaging with. And that's really what a brand studio, functions as. What's the creative that we're making that reaches an audience? And in the B2B space, a lot of that is around interesting thought leadership. A lot of that is around case studies that you do with companies. But what we've really tried to do is just turn it on its head and make it really interesting. I think there's a lot of really good research that the LinkedIn B2B Institute is doing that's sort of showcasing that most B2B companies have really done it wrong the last 2 decades. They've over-indexed on hyper-targeting and trying to find the audience, but then they're serving that audience with the most boring content possible, almost forgetting that, like, hey, who is a business decision maker in this day and age? When did they grow up? What are their interests? You know, they're not what they looked like 40 years ago. And I think that's really interesting in terms of, like, we've looked at, you know, who the audience is, and you need to basically pay a lot more attention to that. You know, your average business decision maker, think about this, Rachel, is 39 years old. If we go and talk to 39-year-olds, their views of the world are going to be radically different from, you know, who I think a lot of B2B buyers think the CMO is, or think
right.
think sort of decision makers are. And that's the other thing I think that's we've really tried to look at too in terms of the content we make. You know, who is the person watching it and who are the other people they're talking to about it? Because we all know we don't live in a silo. We all look for social proof from others. Good example, the last pair of shoes you bought or whatever you may have bought, you didn't buy that and just look in the mirror and say, this looks good. You probably asked other people, hey, is this interesting? And you probably realized the trend right now is this. That's social proof. That's using others to sort of verify.
I definitely saw a Facebook ad. I got suckered by the face. I saw the shoes. I've seen them so much on Instagram, and they opened the store, and I'm like, oh, those are the shoes that I keep seeing on Instagram. There I went, bought the pair of shoes.
There you go. So, I mean, those are things that, you know, you think about, like, what's the human condition? What are the trends of the moment? What's the culture of the moment? All the things that everyone said for the last 2 decades doesn't matter in advertising. We've really tried to embrace that. I mean, if you could say we're sort of contrarian in some respects, but not really contrarian to say, like, we told you so, more like, hey, humans haven't really changed at all. We want the same things. We want to be part of a tribe. We want to be part of a group. We want to make the right sort of decisions. We may want to sort of go off on our own every once in a while, but not too far. We're looking for social validation. We're social animals, Rachel, if you think about it. We're mammals. Like, that's something I think we don't bring a lot into our work. Like, we almost throw that away, not thinking that's important at all. But that is important. I think we should, like, study more history. I think we should study more anthropology. I think those are things that are interesting, in addition to, of course, you know, technical literacy. So it's really bringing both of those worlds together.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're right. You're right. And I think the point that we're social, right? We're humans. We want to connect. We want to communicate with each other, and that marketing should really be facilitating that human conversation and connection between brand, people, customer, right? And instead, really, we are living in a world of demand gen. I mean, there wasn't a demand gen role like, what, 10 years ago? I mean, but now it's like demand gen. I want leads, 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 leads. It's transaction, because we want to build huge email lists, get as many leads as possible, and look to convert, right?
Yep.
And that's a very transactional business that can make money, but doesn't have longevity over, you know, customer lifetime value, as they say, you know, more technical term, I guess, to some. And yeah, I think that, Jeff, we're kind of different than a lot of marketers. I think the disruption is in the simple thing. Yes, Julie, human to human. Exactly. And I don't know why that's so disruptive to, like, want to be human and treat people like humans, Jeff, but it seems like that is really so simple.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up, you just used the term transactional. I think what's happened in the last, you know, 2 years is you had a transformation that doesn't work moving forward with where we are. If you're being treated at your place of work or as a customer, you know, transactional by design, that's when people sort of use their feet to walk elsewhere. That, you know, we get a ton of I think manager training and other people talking about how do you treat people as a human? How do you treat them with radical candor? What that means is you actually care about the person and you give good, direct feedback. I always think in a creative role, the best thing is to have creative tension. Some people don't think that that's important, but it is. What that tension does, Rachel, is you get the best creative work out of people. Like, hey, this could be better, and here's why. That's not necessarily a bad thing if you also approach that with, I actually care about you as a person and how you progress. If you're just being a jerk to someone, that comes across in the wrong way. I think we have tons of stories about how maybe Steve Jobs used to sort of behave like, oh, you could be better. And people didn't realize he was sort of a jerk to them, but he wanted the best out of the people that worked for him. If you approach it and say, I want the best out of you because I actually care about you as a person, that's when people are like, okay, I want to do my best work. That's possible. Somewhere along the lines, we were taught, I think, during much of the 90s to just make everything transactional, that you should treat everyone like a cog in the wheel, that if someone left an organization, you just replace them with somebody else. I mean, think about hiring now. Most of it's absolutely, terrible, because basically you have people that just are saying, let's look for certain skills. Let's not look at the whole human condition. Let's not look at sort of like the well-roundedness of someone. And let's, put them into this particular role. This is why I think a lot of companies haven't made any headway when it comes to, diversity, hires, because they're all looking for the same people rather than saying, let's give this person a chance, knowing that, let's see what they could do. I don't think companies really want to do that as much as they say they want to. It's all lip service, basically. Yeah. So those, and I think you have to call that out, because I think companies want to make headway there. They're just slower in doing it. Yeah.
So as we sort of near an end here, and hi, Ileana. See, Ileana's on. How do you think, because you're with Microsoft advertising, how through marketing and content and even advertising can you create that tension that is still empathetic and build a relationship? How do you do that at scale?
I mean, I think a lot of it really comes down to, the products and services that you have. I mean, I think that's an important area that we can't just say, hey, let's not look at that. Let's only just look at the communication. We know, Rachel, that if that was how easy it was, everyone would be doing that. I mean, you really have to have, good solutions, and then you have to have very interesting communications on top of that. And I think a lot of that communication, you have to sort of, use what we've done in sort of the organization. How are you using really inclusivity to sort of drive a lot of that messaging? I'm actually shocked that a lot of companies haven't really adopted more of this, by looking around at the world, in front of them and realizing, hey, there's a lot of different people in the world, not like me whatsoever. How do we integrate a lot of that into our communication style? How do we make sure we're much more, accessible when we think of things? About 6 years ago, when we were writing a lot of blog pieces, one of the things I sort of said to the team is, how if you don't want to read? How if you're not a person that enjoys reading? You're really leaving a lot of those people out of the equation. And the team was like, well, what are you getting at here? And I'm like, why don't we read the blog posts to people so we have audio? Why don't we do video that has infographics that explain these things? A lot of that, I think, too, was just from my upbringing and how I was educated. I enjoy reading, but I realize a lot of people don't necessarily like to read. They have different learning styles. We have a lot of differently abled people in the world that learn different ways. And you shouldn't just say, well, this is the one way we do things. That's like the worst sort of approach to things, Rachel, when we're like, hey, there's only one way to do it. That just basically says you have like a fixed mindset on how things are going to operate. And so we were like, hey, let's just experiment with, how we reach people with different communication styles. I think that's the best thing marketers can do right now. And that's how you do. And that's, to answer your question, how you get scale. Think of just different ways of doing things based on what your, idea is. If you want to communicate this particular message, how are you getting that to people so that they can understand that beyond just writing about it? I think writing is important, but it should open up areas that we should also experiment in. Video obviously is a huge part. We're on video right now of how people communicate. How do you use that in new and unique ways? What are the other ways that you can sort of, foster some more openness with others? I think that opens doors up to lots of people where they are more open to wanting to learn a little bit more, and that may lead down sort of that, as you've noted earlier, that transactional sort of path where they're like, hey, I am going to register to get more information from this company because I'm in the market for it, and I like the way that they've sort of communicated what they're doing. But I think we're in an era of just like mass experimentation again in messaging, because of the fact that the last 10 years everyone said this is the way to do it, and now with sort of some of the forthcoming changes happening on the web, it's going to lead to a very, very creative era for those who are ready for that again.
Yeah, I think it's really critical what you're talking about. I haven't heard it said in differently abled people. I love that. I'm going to definitely steal that from you. But what you're talking a little bit about is people consume content in a lot of different ways because they have different capabilities, interests, etc. So
Yep.
I've talked about this too around just multisensory. What does that mean? How are you providing opportunities for people to read, to listen, to touch, whatever that case is, and really being cognizant of where people are both physically, emotionally, geographically. And what that lends itself to is, and Bagil was on last week and we talked about this segmentation with your audience and how important right now, because we have so much data and we're so global and we're so connected, that the more hyper focused you actually are with bringing your product or service to market, the better. That, like, it's true that at least I think that the riches are in the niches, that when you kind of find the right segment and you can speak to them with whatever that product or service is and do that in different ways, that really to me is more modern marketing. It is hard to do. It's challenging.
Yeah.
It doesn't take mass marketing. It takes really thinking about your product or service, your brand. What do you want to give? How do you want to serve? And to who specifically, behaviorally? I think that is a new way of marketing. And you're talking about that as well.
Yeah, it's like for a long time it was really just based on demographics. Where is someone located in the world? How old are they? And what's their income? I guess it's become a little more complex in the sense that we're really asking questions on like, what are people's interests, and what are other things that they would like to do. And the other thing too, Rachel, that's interesting that I think a lot of us forget in marketing is we have a tendency of marketing basically where the world, we think it's just static and it's going to stay the same for the next 5 years. I think a lot of marketers do this because they think they can time the market, which I'd like to tell them, if you could time the market, you'd be a billionaire, because you'd be able to sell that secret solution to everyone. You might be in a certain situation right now, but in 3 years you could be in a different situation. That's where marketing is really helpful. I think a lot of people forget that people do move through different careers and through different parts of their life, and the things that can stick with them is good messaging that someone sees when they may have to make a decision. There's something that they might draw back to. We call that mental availability. And that's really what they draw on. And I think that's what marketers need to basically get back to, is like, hey, my marketing creates mental availability. It basically has people to think about me when they're in a situation and they have to think about that particular solution. I'm sort of top of mind, because the problem is most marketers think that people think about them 100% of the day. They don't. They may think of them like 0.01% of the year. And that's why you want mental availability. And that applies to personal and professional brands and whatever branding you're doing. And hopefully people have, there's one thing they take away from our talk today, they take that sort of like metric or equation away. What you're doing is really to drive mental availability.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. We do have, before we kind of sign off here, what's your thought on multicultural marketing versus general marketing?
I think that's an area that's been around for, a period of time. There's really good people that work in sort of the multicultural worlds that understand those audiences. I think there's definitely, you know, a place for that depending on the product. This is why you have a number of companies that, you know, do marketing in various languages because they want to reach a particular you know, core audience. And I also think, you know, multicultural agencies, when I've spoken to them, they'll say like, hey, Jeff, nah, this is the idea we want because this is sort of more rooted in that group's culture. I think there's definitely a place for that, especially with how we market on the web, which is just much more niche focused. So I've seen growth in those areas, not contraction. I think, you know, you need general marketing and you need multicultural marketing. And I also think you can take multicultural marketing. So hear me out here for a second, Rachel. You could take a multicultural marketing, like let's say like a message or an ad you're doing, and actually spread that to the general audience. We've seen in research that people enjoy more inclusive marketing that might be only intended for a particular audience. They actually enjoy that at scale. So those are things that I think people have to think about as well.
I love that. Perfect. Whew. Well, Jeff, and we could go on for hours. And the good news is that Josh and I have a cool event coming up. We're teasing it out next week. It's on September 21st. More information to come next week, and Jeff is going to be part of it. And that means you're going to be in for a real treat. So more information to come. You're going to have more time with Josh and me and Jeff and some lucky, amazing guests in September. So more to come. Jeff, you have been incredible. I love talking to you. I always learn so much from you. Thank you for your time today. I hope people followed Jeff and check him out. He really is somebody you want to keep in mind when it comes to marketing. So thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Rachel. Always good to talk to you.
All right.